Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Skilled Personnel Network and a very special interview episode once again, interviewing the consortium of expert speakers from our new package, L&D Companion. I'm absolutely delighted to introduce to you people someone you may already know, Sharon Pickering. Sharon, without further ado, I'm going to allow you to introduce yourself.
Thank you so much, Foddy, and thank you for asking me to join your community. I am a human factors scientist, and what that essentially means in simple terms is I build safety nets of systems around high-performing professionals. But I always put them at the core. So I work on their environment, their tools, their procedures, the training, and it's all in the name of optimizing health and performance at work. So that's essentially human factors as a discipline, but I have got a slightly different spin on it, which we'll get into with some more questions.
Absolutely. And I must admit, human factors was actually, as a terminology, Sharon, was something that I think I only really fully got introduced to when I met you. And then I got to understand a bit more about it, and certainly the way that your career has developed, that journey. So, I mean, perhaps that would be a great place to start for those listening. So, how did you get into doing what you're doing?
Yeah, I absolutely can recall it down to the day. So essentially, I was on the path to becoming a fast jet pilot, and I was also studying psychology at the time. And during one of the psychology modules, somebody handed me an air accident investigation report, and that fundamentally had a seismic shift in what I wanted to do with my life. I got very fascinated by how to prevent things going wrong and how we can really learn from what goes right. So obviously I could have gone down to being a pilot, would have been an incredible career because they're just exceptional people and they do exceptional things in the world. But what I fundamentally wanted to do was have an influence in supporting safety systems so that people at work could be much safer, but also be much healthier. So with that, went down more of a psychological route and approach to that, and then ended up in aeronautical engineering and designing flight decks for the first part of my career. So for around 15 years, I worked around the world working with designers, working with pilots, working with managers to optimize the design of new flight decks.
Wow, incredible. And in respect of actually seeing how you transitioned the work that you're doing into, the education aspect and the learning and teaching aspect, Sharon, how did you sort of find that transition? Because, I mean, I suppose what you described there is that early stage of your career, looking at potential moving to becoming a pilot and aviation. But then you got into the teaching aspect, the training aspect of it, and then what's interesting is that you saw the connection or the similarities between the pressures that pilots and people in aviation work under, and the intricacy of it, and that of healthcare, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so about 15 years into my career, I'd been working primarily in military and aviation. And we were working mostly on design aspects. So that was more around the physiology, so the design of an environment, how people sit, whether they're going to be comfortable for the time that they're on a mission. And then we were working on the decision-making aspect and situational awareness. So this was all like the cognitive psychology processes. But there was not a lot of application of the emotional side. So we definitely worked towards how do we build this into human factors, because you can't have one human element without the other human element. Everything works in synchronization. So I recognize that at this point, the aviation industry had probably spent a good 50 years on human factors being a priority, implementing it into absolutely everything throughout the industry. But I started to have discussions with friends who worked in healthcare, and they actually understood what human factors was as a discipline, but they said we actually haven't had an opportunity yet. I'm going back 20 years now. So they said we haven't had an opportunity yet to talk to anybody in human factors. We haven't seen anybody come in and work with us on the training side. So at that time, there was a big transition in the industry where consultants from the aviation industry were actually going into healthcare, and they were using aviation-based principles. So what is really important with this is the adaptation. It's not that there is a gold standard industry to reference, because within industry, everything is different. So definitely there's a stark difference for me when I transitioned from aviation into healthcare. But what was fundamentally common was that the people made the difference, and it was the people that brought the purpose to what they did at work, which enabled the human factors to actually work. Because once you've got the buy-in from the people to impact change, to work together in collaboration, when people were invested to have the choice, that was the difference. So in the education aspect, rather than just standing there and dictating the science, it was absolutely fundamental in healthcare to have people bring their perspective to the table, because everybody at work has an opportunity to influence something positively. So what we used to do was spend a lot of time facilitating conversations where we would look at things that weren't working, but equally look at things that were working. And we would try to balance them and see if there's things that we can improve and there's things that we could advance, so that essentially there was new opportunities for improvement mechanisms within healthcare. But the people were key to the success.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we think very, very important aspects that I think is finally becoming more and more open in discussion, Sharon, is if we look after our people, and if we think about healthcare, we look after our people, the people look after our patients. And you know, in healthcare, that I'd say is absolutely key area. Now, do we do it brilliantly? No, I think it needs work, but I think it's becoming more and more apparent that we need to start looking after our people a lot more, and that will have a positive knock-on impact on the treatment of patients and everything. Sharon, how do you so what we're going to look to try and do with L&D Companion is build a journey for each healthcare professional to have their cut-off starting point where they are now in their career. And that could be someone who's starting their career as a student or a newly qualified through to a senior leader. So what we're going to try and do is get everyone who joins at the point they join to have that cut-off point and go, right, okay, I'm willing to have a growth mindset on starting now to go forward. How do you see that journey? And what have you seen in people's journeys that's been most interesting for you? So, you know, when from the point at which they've started you know, that development in working with yourself and within a human factors journey to where they potentially can go with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's been some really fascinating transitions in people's careers that I've had the pleasure to be a part of and definitely observe. But it fundamentally starts with holding some space initially so that they can have a voice of what it is that why. So you normally start with why. Why do I even get up in the morning? Why did I even start this career? So that doesn't matter if it's a medical student or if it's somebody at managerial level that's been in the industry for 30 years. It's the principle of reconnecting with the emotional aspects of why you started your career in healthcare. And then once you establish that, it's keeping that re-engaged. So we can quite easily focus on all the frustrations that are happening around us. And we call these external stresses in healthcare. So how I would approach that is actually bringing it back to the internal reasons. This is why I exist. And other people call it a purpose, but I think it's beyond purpose because it's actually a lifestyle and it's actually a mindset. So once we re-engage people with the why, we then start to see a mindset shift into how they can see that they're a critical component to actually influencing change. Because change only happens when somebody has an idea and instigates it, but yet the opportunities sometimes aren't always available. So what we'll be doing in the offerings during the webinars and the training is we'll actually be giving people a voice of what do you see in your day-to-day world. I'm definitely not going to be there to dictate how anybody should do their job, because really the people that we're talking to, and in this case the radiographers, will be the ones that bring all of the knowledge. So we're also on receive. We want to hear how they experience their days and where they can see opportunity. And then we will be a part of facilitating how they can influence some change or manifest some conversation. So at least to get things moving from point one to point two, because those incremental changes actually do add up to something that's more impactful in the long term.
Definitely. And I think this is a really key point now. So if I can see two areas immediately, Sharon, as feedback during our research about putting together L&D Companion, was that it was what can they utilise as a result of this career development programme that they can do differently? What tools can they have that they can fundamentally use the following days as they go back into their daily practice? And the second one, which is interesting because it is definitely an external factor, is how can they positively influence some of the workforce that's perhaps in their eyes hindering them from moving forward. Sometimes peers, sometimes their line managers. Common thing I'd heard is, look, this is great that I'm going looking at this, but my manager should be looking at this and watching this and try and make a change. So, I think it's about trying to understand how we can support those particular questions, and sometimes the mindset of how, because we can only influence sometimes certain things at periods of time, but we can potentially, as you say, find ways in which we can deal with things better.
Yeah, so what we'll do is we'll convert the science and the principles, practices, and tools into practical application. And that's actually fundamental to everybody buying into this journey together. So career development only happens if we're proactive with it, and it only happens if you can have an opportunity to make practical steps and you can actually see tangible impacts. So we'll be talking a lot about human to human interaction, because somehow we've lost a little bit of that in the noise of the technology advancement, the integration of AI, the patient safety demands. We've almost forgotten that as humans in that whole system of healthcare, that we also have the potential to be patients. So it's fundamentally critical that we focus on that first. And then how do we communicate our needs to others? So there'll be a lot around the psychology of communication, and certainly a lot around negotiations. The negotiation is one of the untouched gems that is absolutely fundamental to success. And this is not just external negotiation, it's how do you negotiate internally with yourself as well. So it's going to be a really fascinating journey, because it's not just the delivery of the science, which basically anybody could go and listen to a podcast or pick up a book. This is going to be super interactive and super engaging, where we're actually getting down to the core of how people think, they behave, how they function, and how we can better smooth that process together, because it's the individual contribution to a team and that team contribution to the wider system in healthcare, what we're aiming to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that I've been really keen to try and I guess develop is an element of self-efficacy with everyone that joins this, Sharon. And I think what you've been just describing there is a journey towards that self-efficacy. And I think one of the things that, I've experienced across the last 20 years of working with radiographers is that, I mean, they have so many different incredible skills that they have touch points across so many areas of healthcare that it's often, but because they're so busy in the day to day, they don't always get the opportunity to exercise a lot of those additional skills that they gain. So a big thing for me is how can we develop and bring out the self-efficacy in radiographers to be able to look at their careers and take ownership of their career themselves, and how can we support that process. So I'm really looking forward to going through that with you. And yeah, I guess one of the
I've said this in many
sorry, you carry on,
I've
Sharon.
said this in many forums. Radiographers are absolutely a fundamental part of the critical path of patients. So we're all talking about the ultimate goal being patient safety, and we're all on that same mission. But if we backtrack to that, what is critical is that people recognize their contribution, but they're also very aware of how to prevent burnout, because it's very prevalent right now in healthcare. And as you said, quite rightly said earlier on, how do we take care of our people, but how also do we get our people to take care of themselves? So we'll be doing a lot of deep dive conversations into burnout prevention, health optimization, and ultimately how that leads to a safer, wider system, not only for patients, but for everybody in the healthcare system.
Definitely. Lulu like that one, didn't you? She puts her head up. Do you know what's been, what's quite apt actually, Sharon? I mean, final thought from me, but something I'd love to get your thoughts on from a perspective of an ideology. So, I mean, and I say it's apt because it has aviation, it has the airline industry at heart. So, this idea that when you're going through the flight safety information before we take off. One of the things the flight attendants will say is make sure you put your mask on before putting your the person next to you, and terminology to that effect. And that kind of leads into almost that is essentially what you were just saying there, which is about taking care of ourselves. First, it's not the easiest thing to learn, right? I mean, because there is a natural tendency to try and, be the altruist and to help others. And sometimes you do get neglected. So I'll be really keen to delve deeper with you about that idea of, putting your own, the similes between putting our own masks on and looking after ourselves, and what that looks like in practice without someone feeling, neglectful of the person next to them.
Yeah, I think part of it, certainly from my experience, part of it is it's human nature that we always want to immediately take care of others' needs first. But the added complexity around this, that healthcare is a complex system, and
Right.
there isn't necessarily a ideal solution to absolutely every problem in healthcare, and that can start to wear people down at some point. So it comes with a complex mix of the intention driven approach to wanting to save others, but also individually getting very, very drawn down to the influencing factors from a day-to-day basis, because things are challenging. So we'll definitely be approaching this with a very pragmatic lens, where we're not just going to come in and say there's essentially a band-aid for every problem that everybody's facing. But what we will be doing is capitalizing on the knowledge and expertise that radiographers have, where they have an opportunity to shine and bring in their knowledge, so that has the impact essentially through the system, because it's not just a disconnected improvement, it actually will have a knock-on effect to improve other systems further down the pathway.
Yeah, thanks for that, Sharon. I, I'm excited thinking about how this is all going to, how we're going to, I think really look to make a difference in career development and people's feedback on it. One last question from me is your thought process on the word resilience, because I think we mentioned the work term earlier, and I think it gets misused sometimes in a sense of people using it to say, you need to be more resilient, you need to be, you need to be able to uh, for want of a better expression, some people would say man up or whatever that terminology might be. However, what we need to understand with resilience is, from a perspective of what we're trying to train and develop is an understanding of how people bounce back, right? I mean, and because I think, like you said, in healthcare, you're going to have those days when nothing goes right, and it's in those moments where the term resilience can play its part. But I'd be just very keen to get your thoughts on the term resilience and how it's utilised in this environment in the healthcare setting. Sorry, I'm being attacked by a fly.
So it's a really critical point of the conversation, actually, because there's lots of terminology out there to represent what people are experiencing and how to optimize their performance. And a lot of people talk about high performance, but actually the narrative should be different. The narrative should be more, what's my optimum performance look like, and how can I sustain that? So then when there's a need for peak performance, I have that capability to ramp up, perform at the highest, and then also come back down again and recover healthily. So we have a lot of conversations, and I'm talking right now with a lot of people across many different industries, but primarily in healthcare, where what does resilience really mean to the individuals? We have to really remember that, yes, we all have human needs, but we all have unique needs as well. And certainly that's going to be a main focus. There's some concepts masked by the terminology. So we're going to be demystifying some of this terminology, and we're going to be making it real world, because at the end of the day, we don't get up in the morning feeling exactly the same way every day. We don't, put a badge of honor on of today I'm super resilient. What we have to do is recognize that each day and sometimes each hour may bring a different need. And there's lots of human factors and angles that come into that. So all the elements of nutrition, hydration, mindset, physical health, emotional health, like we're really going to be looking at a more holistic approach where human factors can raise the awareness, and then the individuals are essentially powered. I don't necessarily like to use the word empowered, because I believe everybody's already at quite a high, powerful state where they've achieved all of their technical expertise, but they also have all this phenomenal non-technical behaviors and intelligence to bring to their role. So we're going to be handing those tools to people and asking them, what of this toolkit will work for you, and can you put the other things in your toolkit so that on a different day you may need something different. So it's going to be more a different style of education. Actually, it's going to be more application driven, where there's a broad range but people have a choice, and that's when people have a choice, they have a tendency to do more to take care of their own health first. That's certainly what we've found in our industry.
Wow, that's amazing. Sharon, thank you so much. I'm genuinely honoured to be working with you on this program. It's going to be, and I use the word journey a lot because it's quite I always find it a really profound word when I think about careers. People are on a journey, and when we get into a growth mindset, that we know that, we haven't reached our end goal from a career perspective. We're always moving along that journey. Honestly, I'm so honoured to be working with you and privileged to be working with you on this. So thank you so much for agreeing to be part of the L&D Companion Consortium of Speakers. And I absolutely look forward to our first webinar.
Thank you so much, Foddy. I much appreciate the inclusion into this journey, because it is going to be a journey for sure. And I really look forward to meeting everybody along the way. So thanks very much for the inclusion.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Sharon. We'll see you soon.